So we look at the brain as something that's malleable and not fixed. It's a dynamic object. So the parietal lobes and the superior parietal lobule is specifically involved in creating a subjective sense of a self, the feeling that I occupy this body and not somebody else's body, right?
Jung's idea was that the dream was a place of exploration for the remapping of anomaly. This is very weird too, everyone.
So you have this REM paralysis, obviously. You're paralyzed from head to toe. During REM sleep, you're dreaming away. Are you familiar with sleep paralysis?
Something was happening to me and I was frozen and unable to speak. And I knew I had to wake myself up. Like I'd try to throw myself off the bed. Sometimes I could yell to my wife. She'd have to come and shake me and then I'd wake up.
So I was sleeping in my room and then I had this creepy feeling of a monster from the corner of my room approaching me, until it was on my chest, strangling me.
What did the monster look like?
Well, I'll tell you.
Okay. Hi, everybody. I had the opportunity today to speak to Dr. Balan Jalal. He's a neuroscientist and author at Harvard, and previously a visiting researcher at Cambridge University Medical School. He's been featured in the New York Times, the Washington Post, and other such publications. The Telegraph and the BBC described him as one of the world's leading experts on sleep paralysis and the terrors and opportunities of dream, fantasy, and adaptation that accompany that condition. What did we discuss? Dr. Jalal's Intro to Neuroscience course at Peterson Academy, the relationship between neuroanatomy, brain function, perception, emotion, and behavior, the function of the dream state, the role of culture and conception in dealing with emotion, particularly fear, and the changing landscape of the modern university. It's quite a trip. Join us. Well, thanks for coming in.
Well, thank you, Jordan, Dr. Peterson. Love to be here.
Yeah, let's talk about Peterson Academy first. We just released a course of yours, Introduction to Neuroscience.
Right.
So I'd like to know, I think it would be useful to talk a little bit about the course, but I'd also like to know about your experience doing the filming and your reflections on the process and the project itself.
Yeah. Well, first of all, it was a lovely process. Let me start there.
Yeah. So
I flew in to Miami. Great reception overall. Nice people around. Ben, Nancy, Vincent, everybody on the team, lovely. The shooting was great. So yeah, top professional, really like that. And then the course itself, it's a 8-hour course on the brain, and sort of going through initially starting from sort of the basics of the brain, the different structures of the brain, then going all the way to sort of higher abstract things like human nature and sort of the nature of how art emanates in the brain and things like that. So it kind of has the nitty-gritty of a introductory neuroscience course, but then also taking in some more sort of poetic aspects of the brain. So it's kind of all that mixed.
Right. So it's an approach to the cultural from the bottom up, from the biological up.
Right.
How much anatomy, functional anatomy, and so forth is in the course?
I make sure that the basics are there. So for a basics neuroscience course, as an introduction, you got to have the basics there, all the brain structures, the cortex, the brainstem, all the different names. But I try to keep it simple so people don't fall asleep. I used to, when I did my first biopsychology neuroscience course, that was incredibly boring. I had all these names thrown at me, and it was
you just had to force memorize them.
It made no sense, right? So what's the cerebellum doing? What's this doing? You just had all these names. You had to memorize them, and that was it. But I really make sure to describe the function and have an overall context for each.
Yeah, I found that I got extremely interested in neuroanatomy, even at a detailed level, when I was reading scientists who associated the area with the function.
It's very important.
Yeah, well, and it was also extremely useful philosophically. One of the advantages, if you're a conceptual thinker, to studying neuroanatomy and neurobiology is that it puts limits on what philosophical propositions are plausible and possible.
Right.
And I really like that.
Yeah.
So it's like you have to play a game with two different sets of rules then, right? It has to make sense conceptually, so that would be philosophically. Right. But then it can't violate the principles of neuroanatomy and neuroscience that are already established.
Yeah.
It's a very good way of initial triangulation.
Yeah, the way that I like to do is that I know that in this course I'll cover this, right? But then I kind of see and explore how I can sort of weave this into sort of a narrative and a story, and then kind of put things in as we go along. And I feel like this makes sense to put this aspect here and put that aspect here, so it doesn't come in this sort of very ABC kind of dry way. So that's my approach, and see how I can let things unfold in a natural way.
And so you said that when you went to do the recording, that the process worked well.
Very well.
What about it worked well?
I was very impressed. So I was very impressed by the whole process, the way things were arranged. Obviously, we were put in a very nice hotel, we felt pampered, honestly.
Good.
You feel pampered. You feel everything is just on point. And then the shooting itself, people around you, they take care of you, bring you food. It's just very, you feel pampered. So it's great. So
yeah, well, I think we realized the importance of that really when I did the first Exodus seminar for the Daily Wire.
Right.
We brought 9 thinkers in, and we spent a fair bit of time on the hospitality side.
Right.
And one of the things I realized, and I knew this in part from working at a university, was that a lot of the professors that we pulled in for that seminar, I wouldn't say they're exactly well treated at their institutions. And that's foolish, because I invited the people who I did invite to the Exodus seminar because I thought they were great and I wanted to hear what they had to say.
Right.
And there's every reason to make that obvious in every detail of treatment.
Yeah.
And so, one of the things I offer people we offer at Peterson Academy, people who come and lecture, because people ask me, well, what lecture do you need? And that's not the right approach. My sense is that I find people whose views I want to know and share, and then I want them to do what they think would be best, because
Right.
I wouldn't bloody well invite them if I didn't think they knew what they were doing.
Yeah.
And I don't want to put constraints on them. And then if we find the right people, we can sort out the curriculum rather than sorting out the curriculum and then forcing the participants, the professors, into it. That makes no sense at all to me.
Absolutely, and that was my approach too, right? So I would talk about my own research, some of the nicest experiments that I love about my work, and sort of weave into that neuroscience curriculum in that way, right? So we talk about, for example, OCD, and then maybe you might mention the orbital frontal cortex, which is overactive in OCD. What's the function of the orbital frontal cortex? The structure in the brain, or the striatum and the basal ganglia in the context of Parkinson's. But again, taking in some work that's very, some experiments that are fascinating. So it's kind of taking that natural approach, that sort of my own research or works of colleagues, and just weaving it in a more natural way, I think.
Okay, so I'm curious. Everybody who studies the brain in some depth
Right.
has their own approach. It's like exploring a continent, let's say. They have their own approach. And so when you lay out the architecture of the brain, let's say the basic anatomy,
Right.
tell me how you do that.
Yeah.
And I would like to hear how you conceptualize the brain. So do that, if you would.
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, I think the way that my view of the brain was inspired by my mentor, V.S. Ramachandran. So
yeah, right. You worked with yes.
I worked
He's
with
a
him.
stunningly effective public speaker.
He's extremely stunningly effective, charismatic. And when I went to California in my early days as an undergraduate, I ended up in his course. So I took his course. So let me take you
When
there.
was that?
That was in 2010, 11, around 11, maybe 2011. So I started there, became a research scholar in his lab eventually. And I think, becoming very good friends with him, ending up in his laboratory, going on, long walks on the beach all the time, and just spending time with him and getting his view on the brain and sort of adapting that as my own view was something that, influenced me. And his approach, obviously, and the approach that I've adopted is one where you sort of look at the brain holistically. You acknowledge that the brain is hyperplastic, so there's all these modules that are highly dynamic, and the brain is extremely malleable. And so we look at the brain as something that extremely, as a fluid process that's malleable and not fixed and set in its own ways. It has this fluidity to it. So that's kind of my view of the brain overall, that it's a dynamic object. But beyond that, let me also explain some of our experiments. So the way that we approach science and probing the human brain is through experiments where we look at conceptual experiments in neuroscience. So, for example, there's the rubber hand illusion, if you probably know that.
Lay it out and explain it to people.
So the rubber hand illusion is this illusion where you have a chap, he puts his hand right here, and then you have his right hand underneath the table, right? And so me, Balan, the experimenter, will stroke and tap the hand of the experimental subject. I'll go stroke, stroke, tap, 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 stroke, stroke underneath the table. And I'll stroke and tap the table in front of Joe, the subject. I'll go tap, tap, stroke, 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 tap, tap. And about 2 minutes of me doing this, he will feel touch sensations arising from the table. And I don't mean this in kind of an abstract metaphorical sense. I mean this literally. He will have touch sensations, somatosensory regions of his brain becoming active from this process.
Yeah, well, that's a very strange element of human perception, right? It must be strongly associated not only with our ability to map sensation onto our bodies,
right,
but also with our ability to use tools. So I know, for example, we're very good at it. Like if I pick up a screwdriver,
right,
it takes me virtually no time to use the tip of the screwdriver in a manner that very much approximates the tip of my finger.
Right.
Right. And then when we go in a car, essentially what we're doing, especially once we're expert drivers, is that we expand the dimensions of our kinesthetic perception, our bodily perception, to include the car, right? So you're feeling with the tires, you're feeling with the brake, right? And that's, well, part of my understanding of that is that that's very tightly associated with our tool using proclivity, because a tool is a bodily extension.
Yeah, absolutely. It's an embodiment, right? So in 2 minutes, I turn this subject into a table, right? And then more than that, if Baland was to take a hammer and go like this on the table, he'll go, he'll feel pain sensations, right? So the pain regions of his brain will light up if I was to look in his scanner and look at the neurons there. So it shows you that in that way you can take something, first of all, you can create a sensation of this table belonging to you, but then
being part of you.
Big part of you, right? It becomes an embodied part of you. But then beyond that, you inflict pain now to the person, to the table, in fact, and then you will feel.
Yeah, well, that would also be part of social perception, I presume. I read a paper not long ago, if I remember the details carefully. They were looking at the difference. I think the dimension was agreeableness,
right?
But it might have been psychopathy,
right?
Which would be the opposite of agreeableness. Right. Let's say that more agreeable people, so less psychopathic people, have more pain activation to the perception of other people's pain.
Right.
So you could imagine that part of the utility in being able to morph your pain sensitivity, even to represent something objective like a table,
right?
That's also a variant of my ability to map my own body, let's say, onto your body, so that the empathy that I feel for you isn't conceptual.
Right.
And I've really been thinking about this in terms of how we understand each other, because it looks to me like what we do to understand each other is I notice what your aim is, partly by watching your eyes.
Right.
I infer your aim. Once I infer your aim, I can inhabit your perceptual space, because if I know your aim, I know the objects that surround you. But I also know how your emotions are configured,
right? Because
they're configured in relationship to the aim.
Yeah.
If I can adopt that aim, then I can embody those emotions and perceptions. Right. I can read off that embodiment, and then so the understanding is actually my simulating you on my own neural architecture,
right.
And then drawing the appropriate inferences from that. And it looks to me like children probably develop that ability. Some of it's nascent, I would say. Some of it's there.
It's very interesting. So we were the first group to show that people with OCD, who has very fixed sense of self, right? So they wash their hands all the time, washing and scrubbing. When they do this illusion, they have a much more sensitivity to it, to the extent that there's a control condition for this illusion, where for the illusion to occur, you have to stroke and tap, stroke and tap in a synchronized manner. That's very important, right? So that's key.
Success in business isn't just about offering an amazing product or service, though that's certainly essential. What truly sets thriving companies apart is having powerful, reliable tools working behind the scenes to streamline every aspect of the selling process. These are the systems that turn the complex challenge of reaching customers and processing sales into something that feels effortless and natural. That's exactly where Shopify enters the picture, transforming the way businesses operate in the digital age. Nobody does selling better than Shopify. They're home to the #1 checkout on the planet. And here's the game changer. With ShopPay, they're boosting conversions up to 50%. That means fewer abandoned carts and more sales going to your bottom line. In today's world, your business needs to be everywhere your customers are, whether that's scrolling through social media, shopping online, or walking into a physical store. Shopify powers it all, seamlessly connecting your business across the web, your store, customer feeds, and everywhere in between. And here's the truth. Businesses that sell more sell on Shopify. Join over 2 million entrepreneurs who have already discovered the power of unified commerce with Shopify's all-in-one platform. Upgrade your business to the same checkout we use with Shopify. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/JBP, all lowercase. Head to shopify.com/JBP to upgrade your selling today. That's shopify.com/JBP.
Right. So you're linking the visual perception to the kinesthetic perception?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely, right? But in people with so the control for this, by the way, is if you do it in a random sequence like tap, stroke, but everything is just random, right? And you do, again, the touching and stroking is random, then the illusion will not occur, or it will be slightly. So you have a slight illusion there, or most of the time, no illusion. So this is the key control for the illusion.
Right. So let's just walk through this so everybody understands clearly. So you have someone with their arm on a table, let's say, their left arm. Their right arm is under the table. So they can no longer see it. Now, what you're doing then is you're interacting with their hidden arm physically. And but they can't see that. They can feel it. At the same time, you interact with the table where they can see it.
Absolutely.
So you're syncing their visual perception with their kinesthetic perception.
Absolutely.
But it's not. But their visual perception isn't focused on their own hand.
Right.
Now they start to react to the table like it's a hand.
Correct.
Okay, now you're extending this to the OCD situation.
Yes.
Okay, so elaborate on that.
Absolutely. And I just want to, one point here is that I mentioned a table. So the original experiment was done with a rubber hand, right? But I'm using table because it's more, it illustrates the experiment better. And I think, and you can have a table as well. So
people would start responding to a rubber hand as if it was their own.
So instead of a table, you would just have a rubber hand that looks like your own hand. And then you stroke and tap the rubber hand right in front of the person.
Right, with their other hand hidden.
Correct.
They start to respond to the rubber hand as if it's theirs.
Right, exactly.
And then flinch if there's a threat to it.
They flinch if there's a threat to it, right?
Okay.
So,
and that can be extended to something as inanimate as a table.
Correct.
Right. Okay.
Or in fact, you can do it in air. So you do know Rich McNally?
Yes.
Some common friend, right? Over at Harvard, right? So one day McNally and I did it in the air. So I did it on Rich. Call him Rich. So it stroke, tap in the air, and he felt the rubber like his own hand was floating in the air. It was kind of spooky.
Wow.
He went, my God, what's happening? I feel my hand is floating in the air.
Right. That must also be associated with a really profound, with our sense of what constitutes ownership.
Right.
Because the idea that something is yours or that something is mine, there's no reason to assume that isn't an extension of something like embodiment. It's certainly the case that, if people's cars are attacked, let's say, or kicked, they respond to that very much as if it's a bodily assault. Right. And so it begs the question, how much of our embodied concept of ownership, like that concept on which we platform the philosophical and philosophy and conception of ownership, is actually the underlying scaffold for that is our ability to extend our embodiment to even inanimate objects, right? Because then they start to become part of us, right? And part of what you're pointing to with your emphasis on brain plasticity, and that is that identity itself, even in terms of perception and pain sensitivity, is fluid and dynamic to a degree that you wouldn't you wouldn't immediately
Absolutely.
presume.
And I do want to differentiate between plasticity and then the dynamic nature of the function and of the modules of the brain. So for example, you have, in terms of the rubber hand illusion, it shows that, for example, we have a structure called the TPJ right here, temporoparietal junction is the fancy name for that. That structure is important for taking